afternoon and welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Jolene Whitney. Last month, an extremely rare event took place on the campus of the University of Vermont. An American citizen was awarded the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany. It's the highest tribute the Federal Republic of Germany can pay to an individual for service to the nation. The recipient of this award is Wolfgang Mieder, the University of Vermont Distinguished Professor of German and Folklore, Emeritus at the University of Vermont. Professor Mieder joins me today. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We're happy to have you. And during the ceremony, the Consul General of Germany to the New England states, Sonja Kreibisch, remarked that she had not presented this award in several years. Here she is talking about Professor Mieder's contribution to American and German culture.
Professor Mieder was suggested to the consulate, and we have supported his nomination because he has done extremely remarkable things in promoting German language, in educating young Americans at the University of Vermont about German language, German literature, about everything German.
High praise. So when did you first learn that you were going to be winning this award?
I received an email letter from Sonja Kreibisch from Boston on January 6th this year, and I had of course not expected anything like that. In fact, I had no idea what it was when it first arrived, but it was a very, very big surprise and obviously a great honor from getting it from my old homeland, Germany. So yeah, it was a unique day, I will have to say that.
Absolutely, and as somebody who's spent years studying folklore and fairy tales, was this something out of a fairy tale for you?
It was like a fairy tale, yes. It kind of had the magic of a fairy tale and a positive ending, so to speak. And as I said, it was so unexpected and overwhelming, and I'm not a person who runs around and say hip hip hooray for myself, you know. So, but anyhow, it really was a special day, an event.
Absolutely. And when did you emigrate here from Germany?
I came very young in 1960. I came by myself to the United States. In a way, wanted to stay just 1 year, but it developed and I just fell in love with this country. So begged my parents not to make me come home. And so I stayed and didn't go home for 4 years actually, and spent a couple years in high school. And then went on to college and eventually, going on to graduate school and so on. But it was a dream come true to come to America for a year. But as I said, as a young person, impressionable, and I liked it here and still do. So I decided to stay and make my immigrant life here in this country.
That's incredible. So is school what brought you here?
Yeah, school brought me here. I thought I would stay 1 year, like many European kids after the World War II, in the late 50s, early 60s. That was kind of something many German students wanted to do. And it usually was a year in high school. But as I said, I was able to stay and then went on and did my university education.
Sure, and the rest is history, so they say.
You could use that proverb, right?
Absolutely. Oh, we'll get into those in a minute. Yeah. So where did you grow up in Germany? Is it like Vermont at all?
Yeah, a little bit. I grew up in northern Germany, close to Hamburg, a beautiful city called Lübeck, and that is on the Baltic Sea. And so what attracts my wife and me to Vermont is in a way the beauty of Vermont. And it is a little bit like in the center of Germany, we have mountains and trees and lakes and so on. Not a lake as beautiful and large as Lake Champlain, of course. So we feel very much at home in Vermont and of course have lived here since 1971.
That's incredible. And you've been studying proverbs and fairy tales. You have hundreds of publications about them. How did you get into that line of study?
Well, as many of us do, I was a graduate student and I took a seminar on folklore, or at that time German folklore, and we had a segment on fairy tales, a segment on jokes, a segment on riddles, a segment on folk songs, a segment on proverbs. And the fairy tales and the proverbs interest me in particular, but also legends. So I've also worked on the famous legend of the Pied Piper of Hameln, something that high school students here in the Burlington area know very well, in South Burlington, because they have programs visiting students from Hameln coming to Burlington and back and forth. So so sometimes you just take a course and you become interested, and then you write your dissertation on a subject that related to that course. And then, as you said, the rest is history.
What was the study of folklore like back then? Has it changed a lot between then and now?
Well, I think folklore studies have been around a long time, but I think since maybe around the 1960s, 70s, scholars and students became more interested in looking at what makes folklore click now. In other words, why do we still pay attention to fairy tales? Why am I interested in the legend of the Pied Piper? Why do I care where a certain proverb comes from? How old is it? Is it only in Vermont? Is it only known in the United States? Do proverbs travel? And that is the fascinating part about folklore, is you can study it if you want to. You could only concentrate, let's say, on Vermont. But you could also say, well, I know a few languages, I like to travel, I like different cultures. Then you can say, well, what is it about folklore? Does it say something about us human beings? Are we really as different as some people think? Or don't we have a common denominator that ties us together? Fairy tales, wishful thinking. Who doesn't wish for a fairy tale ending? So
those fairy tales, those are universal.
They are quite universal, that's right. I mean, there are basic stories that relate to human behavior, to human wishes for a happy ending, and they also show how our experiences, no matter where you live, are actually quite similar. From rags to riches, Cinderella story. Well, you can experience that anywhere in the world. So fairy tales too traveled from culture to culture. The Grimm fairy tales that you know about, they were translated, and then they took a hold in England, they took a hold in the United States, and I think that is the big difference between modern children's books and the fairy tales. We have beautiful modern children's books, and I love them, and I like the illustrations. But notice, every year you have a new bestseller. But your child might read this book. My child might read this one. And when they meet, they don't necessarily have something to talk about. All that they could do is say, I read this book and I loved it. But you couldn't respond to it. But if you read Cinderella or Little Red Riding Hood, you have a common cultural denominator, and you can relate to it, and you can allude to it. If I say to you Cinderella, you know right away what I'm talking about, or Snow White. Of course, Walt Disney enters into all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
As you know, there was a new Frog Prince movie and so on.
So is that kind of enduring nature come from how common they are, how much everyone knows about folklore? Is that why we still have it now?
Yeah, I think part of it is, of course, nowadays, part of it is marketing. I mean, it is a tradition to buy children's books, But again, if you go to a bookstore, I was in a bookstore just recently in Littleton in New Hampshire, a beautiful bookstore. But the children's books are all rather unique. And there was a small section of mythology and fairy tales, but not very big. And of course, fairy tales, from a point of view of psychology, some fairy tales are problematic. They do have violent scenes. And so one shouldn't read a fairy tale to a child as a bedtime story, or at least finish it before the child falls asleep. Because the positive ending will come, but individual scenes can be rather gruesome, as you know.
Sure. Now let's move a little bit away from fairy tales and talk more about proverbs, which you've also spent a lot of time working with. So what can we learn from proverbs academically?
Well, proverbs are basically statements that generalize human experiences and human observations. So what you learn from proverbs is that we can crystallize our reactions to the world into small units, pragmatic units of language, and thereby communicate metaphorically our feelings, our thoughts. And of course, proverbs lend themselves to be used in any situation. You know, we pick the one that happens to fit. They come automatically to you. You don't go someplace and say, I wonder what proverb I'm going to use today. Well, I sometimes do just for fun.
I bet you do, yeah.
But they come as you communicate or as you think. They come to you as a way of summarizing what you happen to be observing or experiencing at that moment. Okay, and of course, proverbs are very good as far as making an argument or closing an argument or convincing someone. So if you can say, look, a penny saved is a penny earned to a youngster, let's just say, you can come across rather nicely in saying it's worthwhile to maybe watch out a little bit how you spend your money in what you do.
Sure. We're almost out of time, but I quickly want to ask, these can be kind of regional, so are there any big proverbs here in Vermont that people might recognize?
Oh yeah, I think my 2 favorite Vermont proverbs is talk less and say more. Good for me to know, talk less and say more. And the other one is a very, very favorite one that most Vermonters know is good fences make good neighbors. And there is kind of a misunderstanding at times. Many people think that the proverb started with Robert Frost, our famous Vermont poet. He wrote a poem called Mending Wall in 1914, and that the proverb appears in that poem twice. But with solid research and help from others, I've now discovered that it appeared already in 1794
Wow.
in a Vermont small newspaper, the Vermont Gazette.
Wow.
And, so you can see it gets to be fascinating once you ask, how old is the proverb? Where does it come from? Where is it known? In the meantime, it has been translated into German. So we say, gute Zäune machen gute Nachbarn.
Wow.
So now you can
Crossed
see
a
from
whole
Vermont
ocean.
to Germany, just like I came from Germany to Vermont.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but thank you and congratulations again.
Well, thank you very much, Jolene.
Absolutely. And that takes care of our
Great pleasure.
program for today. I want to thank the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX, whose actions always speak louder than words. I'm Jolie Whitney. This is Across the Fence. Have a good one.